by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. What does that mean? Well, hello again. Welcome to another video. This is a video where I am responding to a question that was asked just recently. The question being, we talk a lot about faith on this channel, and rightly so, I think. But the question was, what is faith from a biblical perspective? What is it in its essence? What does it actually mean? And by logical progression, I guess, if we're going to define biblical faith, then what would be a definition of biblical works? Because throughout the Bible, the two terms are often compared and contrasted in various different ways. So I thought it might make sense to cover this in two separate videos. We'll talk about faith, and then next time around we will follow up and we'll talk about what works are in the Bible. So today we're talking about faith, and I think a good place to start here is with some word definitions, and then we'll go on and flesh things out a little bit more with some added Bible-isms. So if we look up from a point of definition, this is a website called Bible Hub here, and this is the definition in the Greek language of the term that is translated to faith in English. The Greek word is the word pistis, which, if you've not encountered that before, you can take a minute and laugh about it if you want, get it out of your system. But the Greek word is translated into three different words in English. Those words are faith, obviously, belief is another, and trust is the third. These are the ways that the Greek is rendered down into English. And one thing I'll add to that from a point of definition, the Bible does this in most cases, not every single case, but in the large majority, when it talks about pistis in a noun form, so it's a reference to your faith as a noun, it will often render that word as faith in English. But when it uses the word pistis in a verb form, it will quite often render it into English as believe. So the exact same word can exist as a noun and as a verb, rendered differently into English. So if we take a look through the Bible at some examples of what I'm talking about, this is Ephesians 2 verse 8. Now this is Bible Hub I'm using, and this is kind of the Greek breakdown of the verse. For by grace you are saved through faith, and this not of yourselves, it is of God, the gift. So that's why if you read from top to bottom, it's a little bit clumsy sometimes, because it's giving you the direct Greek into the English. But you can see this word pisteos here, same word, translated faith here in Ephesians 2 verse 8. And also, if I scoot over here to the right-hand side, you can see this is a noun. This word is a noun. If we go to John 3:16, of course, a very well-known passage. John 3:16, thus foreloved God the world, that the Son, the only begotten, he gave, so that everyone believing in him not should perish, but should have life eternal. If I go up, pisteon here, translated into believing, and you see over here it's a verb. So same root word as we were just talking about, rendered as a noun as faith in Ephesians 2 verse 8, rendered as a verb as believe here in John 3:16. And then lastly here, Luke chapter 16 and verse 11, if therefore in the unrighteous wealth faithful not, you have been, this is really messy going straight from Greek to English, the true riches who to you will entrust. But this word here, entrust, it's a verb again here, but it's the same root word translated entrust here, this sense of trusting. So again, same Greek word rendered as faith, belief, and trust into English. So that's kind of the dictionary definition of the term, which is a good solid place to start. But where I would go next is to look at a biblical description of faith. And we can find that in the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 11. The beginning of Hebrews 11 reads, can I scroll down so you can see that? There we go. Now faith is the certainty of things hoped for, a proof of things not seen. Well, what does that mean? What I would say is that description latches on to the concept of faith being about trust. Biblical faith is not merely believing something to be true. As we just looked at from a point of definition, sometimes the word believe is used as an English translation of the term, but biblical faith asks for a little bit more than just belief. It also asks for trust, trusting something to be true. Well, you could ask, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between belief and trust? Well, that's a good question. If I can offer an example, I can believe that I have two hands right here. That's something that I believe to be true. I believe that I have two hands, but I don't have biblical faith that I have two hands. Why not? Because Hebrews 11 just told us that faith is a proof of things not seen. But I can see my two hands. They're right here in front of me. I can't faith that I have two hands because it's obvious. It's self-evident. My two hands are not seen, right? So they don't fit the definition. They're right here. So I can believe that I have two hands, but it doesn't meet the biblical definition of faith. To give you another example, after Jesus' death and resurrection, he appears to his disciples in John chapter 20. So John chapter 20, and we'll go down to, this is good, down to verse 25 would be good. So Thomas, I'll just kind of paraphrase what's going on here. Jesus appears to the disciples, and Thomas says, unless I see in his hands the imprint of the nails, and put my finger into the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. And Jesus basically says to him, okay, go on then. And Thomas does so, and he responds, verse 28, my Lord and my God. And Jesus says to him, because you have seen me, have you now believed? Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed. So what's going on here is Jesus is kind of calling out Thomas here that, so now you believe, right? You're standing here with your hands in the wounds of my resurrected body, and now you believe. Jesus says, blessed are they who did not see and yet believed. This is the same root issue, right? Thomas is believing in the resurrection here. He's believing in the power of Jesus over life and death, but he isn't having what we would call biblical faith here, because at this point, with Jesus standing in front of you with his hands in Jesus's resurrected body, it's now self-evident, right? At the foot of the cross would have been a great time to have faith. The 3 days while Jesus was in the tomb would have been a great time to have faith. But this is not faith. Now that Jesus is standing in front of him and saying, here I am, it's me, here are my wounds. The time for faith in the resurrection has passed in that sense, right? For Thomas to not believe at this point, you'd have to be in denial or just crazy, right? Detached from reality in some way. And so Jesus here is saying, yeah, so what I'm asking for is for people to believe without just seeing it. And he's asking that because that is the essence of biblical faith. Those who believe without seeing have biblical faith, to trust in something even though we can't see it or maybe can't prove it, but we trust in it, we believe it anyway. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I made the point that I can't prove to you that my sins have been forgiven. I can't prove to you that God is going to resurrect my body after this life is over. But I believe it to be true. I trust it to be true. That's the essence of faith or belief or trust. So the next thing to talk about, and I apologize, my camera keeps dropping offline here for some reason. Next thing to talk about is faith and its role in the gospel, or more specifically, perhaps, the salvation that is offered through faith. In the Bible, we are called to believe. We're called to have faith in order to be saved, in order to have our sins forgiven. But the other important aspect of believing, of having faith, is that belief or faith requires an object, right, of some sort. I'm just talking purely from a language perspective here. If I were to walk into a church, maybe a church is a bad example. If I walked into a church and said, I believe, they would probably understand what you mean. And the reason they would probably understand what you mean in a church is because it's kind of part of the vernacular. It's part of the vocabulary that churches use. So if you walk into a church and you say, I believe, they would probably fill in the blanks to understand what it is that you're talking about. But outside of that church context, if I were to walk into, say, a restaurant or shopping mall or something like that, and were to say to somebody, I believe, they would quite rightly look at me and say, in what? You believe in what? Because, like I said, faith, just from a language perspective, belief requires an object. You have to have faith in something. You have to believe in something. You can't just say you believe. That's only half a sentence. You need to fill in the rest of the sentence. You have to believe in something. Now, in a biblical sense, a lot of people will fill in that blank by saying you have to believe in Jesus in order to be saved, which is not necessarily a bad answer. That's not a terrible answer. But you have to be a little bit careful here about what exactly you mean. For example, when you say you have to believe in Jesus, do you mean that you have to believe that a carpenter lived 2,000 years ago in Israel? He was born to Mary and Joseph, and he was nailed to a cross by the Romans. Is that what it means to believe in Jesus? Because keep in mind, there is a large body of historians all over the world today who would describe themselves as atheists, right? No belief in the existence of any God, but they would affirm and believe in the existence of what I just said, of the man Jesus of Nazareth who lived and died, was crucified by the Romans. They would believe in all those things because there's a significant amount of historical evidence to point to those things as true. But so these atheistic historians, would we say that they are believing in Jesus? Are they, quote unquote, going to heaven because they have saving faith? Beyond that, even more examples, like, for example, Muslims believe in the existence of Jesus. Mormons believe in the existence of Jesus. Jehovah's Witnesses believe in the existence of Jesus. If we look in the Bible, for example, Pontius Pilate believed that Jesus existed. I mean, he stood in the same room as him and he talked to him, as did King Herod, as did Judas, as did Satan. So would we say all of these had biblical faith too? They believed in Jesus, and so they were saved? Because if it's just about believing in the existence of Jesus, then we would have to conclude that yes, all these examples of individuals are saved because they all believed in Jesus. But again, we have to remember what we talked about from Hebrews chapter 11, that it's not just about what is seen, it's about what is not seen. So if we latch on to the example of Judas, just to use one single example, well, he obviously believed in the existence of Jesus. I mean, he shared the same room as him many times. They would have had many conversations, but Jesus had the power to forgive Judas's sin. And Jesus had the power to resurrect Judas from the dead. Jesus had the authority granted to him by God to forgive, to atone for those who believe. And these are the things not seen. The promises of God given to the Son were the things not seen, and Judas did not believe in those. That is the definition of biblical faith, the things that are not seen, right? Judas saw a lot, but the things that were not seen, he did not believe in. So it's not just about believing the existence of Jesus and you're set. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. And the next point, if we're speaking of nuance, I'll ask a question. Does everybody need to believe in Jesus to be saved? Because how about if we go back through history, what about someone like Noah? Or what about someone like Abraham? Did they believe in Jesus? Well, again, it's a bit nuanced because it rather depends on what we mean. See, the name Jesus is an English rendering of a Latin rendering of a Greek rendering of a Hebrew name. And we have to consider, for example, when Noah and when Abraham walked the earth, most of those languages hadn't been invented yet. So I think if we could build our time machine and go back in time and talk to Noah and ask him about Jesus, he would have no clue what you're talking about. He would not have known the name Jesus. Now, there's some things he would have known. For example, in Genesis 3, we read about the prophecy given by God to Adam and Eve of the one who would strike Satan on the head, and surely that prophecy would have been passed on through generations. Noah and Abraham would have been aware of this prophecy of the one who was to come, but they wouldn't have recognized the name Jesus, I don't think. There's no reason to think that they would have recognized the name Jesus. If we actually go, I seem to quote this passage a lot in these videos. If we talk about Abraham for a moment, his salvation specifically is discussed in the beginning of Romans chapter 4. Romans chapter 4, beginning verse 1, reads, "What then shall we say that Abraham our forefather according to the flesh has found? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness." So, how was Abraham saved? Abraham was saved through faith. Faith in Jesus? Well, not necessarily faith in that name, but certainly through faith. Well, what about Noah? How was Noah saved? Well, if we go over to, this is Hebrews chapter 11 here. We read the definition of faith here a little while ago. But if we read on a little further, now faith is the certainty of things hoped for, a proof of things not seen. Verse 2 reads, "For by it," that is faith, "for by it the people of old gained approval." And then if we read down to verse 7, "By faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith." Next verse, verse 8. "By faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance, and he left, not knowing where he was going." So Noah and Abraham, if they didn't know the name Jesus, were saved by faith, but faith in what, right? What was the essence of their faith if it wasn't rooted in the name of Jesus? Well, as the text says here in Hebrews 11, God told Noah about the flood, and Noah believed. And God told Abraham to go to a place that God would show him, and Abraham believed. So we can say, simply put, that these men were saved through faith in the things that God revealed to them, which, if we look at that in a broad sense, is really no different than us today. We know about Jesus, but we know about Jesus because God revealed him to us. So for all of us, for Noah, for Abraham, for you, for me, anybody else, we are all saved through faith in whatever things God reveals to us. And this is summed up quite well at the very beginning of the book of Hebrews. We've been looking at Hebrews 11 here. If we go to the beginning of the book here, Hebrews chapter 1 reads, "God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, in these last days he has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the world." So this is exactly what we were talking about just now. The revelation that God gave to Noah was different than the revelation that God gave to Abraham. But now in these days, in 2021, that revelation from God finds its ultimate fulfillment in and through the person of Jesus Christ. So for all of us today living in this time period, our salvation is rooted in faith in him, right? In our present day, given that Jesus has been revealed to the world, we cannot, for example, reject Jesus Christ and yet claim to have faith in God. That's, I think, the essence of what this passage in Hebrews chapter 1 is saying, that the fulfillment, the culmination of God's revelation in present day centers on the person and the promises of Jesus Christ. Okay, so what we've gotten to so far is we've talked about what faith is, and we've talked about how we are saved through it. The next thing to talk about with regard to faith is to say that faith is not meritorious. And that might sound like a fancy word. What does it mean? Well, I've heard some people suggest that faith, as it relates to the gospel, it's all about faith being the thing that makes us good enough to warrant salvation. That if you think in a broad sense about going to heaven, for example, that having faith is the entrance fee that we pay in order to go to heaven, right? I've heard some people kind of teach this view that if I have faith in God, then I've paid that entrance fee, I've paid the price, and so therefore I deserve entry into heaven, because just logically speaking, if I've paid the price, then there's no reason why I wouldn't deserve to go to heaven. But faith is not meritorious. In other words, just my faith by itself has zero value to it. My faith is worth absolutely nothing. As we said earlier, my faith is something that I believe, something that I trust. I believe Jesus died to pay for my sin. I believe that Jesus will resurrect me after this life is over. But my believing has no intrinsic value to anybody or to anything. Think about it this way. If our faith is the thing that pays our entrance fee into heaven, then Christ died on the cross for absolutely no reason, right? Because if my faith was what secured it, if my faith was what paid the price, then Jesus didn't need to die. The reality is that our sin, our entrance to heaven, was fully paid for by the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. But he chooses to grant that forgiveness to those who place their faith in him. The way one pastor described it, and I thought this worked well as a picture, imagine you're in an apartment building, you're somewhere several stories up high off the ground, and the building is on fire, and you're trapped, you can't get out. And a firefighter comes up on a ladder, he comes up to the window, he comes in through the window, and he says to you, just grab a hold of me, and I will take you down. And so you grab a hold, and he takes you out of the building, he takes you back down the ladder to the ground, and you are saved, to borrow the same terminology. Now, nobody would ever conclude that I saved myself from that burning building by grabbing a hold of the firefighter. I didn't earn the rest of my life because I grabbed a hold of the firefighter. No, the firefighter did all of the work, right? If the firefighter failed in his task, or if for whatever reason he just decided not to go up on that ladder, I'd be dead, right? There's nothing that I could do myself to save myself, right? But when they did the work, they asked me to do one very simple thing, and I did it. And by doing that one simple thing, I get to inherit everything, right? I get my life back. I get to live on another day, but on the basis of their work, not mine, right? And nobody, as I said, nobody would ever say that I saved myself from that burning building simply because I did one tiny thing. In a biblical context, we can think of a similar parallel in the parable of the prodigal son. In Luke chapter 15, I'll scroll down here. Now, it begins verse 11 here. I'm not going to walk through this whole parable because it's quite a long parable, and it's also quite well known. Most Christians have happened upon it one time or another. But long story short, Jesus is teaching about salvation here as he begins to teach this parable. And he tells this parable of a son who does horrible things. He rejects his family. He spends all their money. He goes away from them. And then he repents and he returns home. And in a circumstance where the father quite rightly could have been angry with him, could have rejected him, in fact, the father is thrilled to have his son back, and he restores the son to his position within the family. And this is a picture, of course, of how God graces us with salvation. Yet again, nobody would read this parable and go, wow, it was really, really good that the son repented when he did so that he could earn his place back into the family. If you read this parable and come to that conclusion, you've completely misunderstood. That's not the point of the parable at all. The point of the parable is that in returning home, in repenting and returning home, the son deserved absolutely nothing. Under the teaching of the Old Testament law, the father would have been within his rights to have the son put to death for the depths of his disobedience and his disrespect to his father. But because of who the father was, he welcomes the son back and he restores him back to the family, right? The restoration of the son was not deserved. It was not worked for or earned by the son. It was a matter of grace. A good passage that sums this up is kind of where we started out, but we looked at it in Greek, Ephesians 2 and verse 8 here. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. So grace here it's not something that we do to earn. The definition of grace is the Greek word charis. The English word charity is derived from the same word. Well, if you think about the nature of charity, when you receive charity or when you donate to charity, it's not something that is deserved. It's not something that someone else has a claim to or that they've earned. The definition of charity is just something that I want you to have, right? It's a gift. You haven't earned it. It's not yours. I'm giving it to you. It's unmerited. That is the essence of grace. And in Ephesians 2 here, for by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not of yourselves. It's the gift of God. It really summarizes the things that we've said, because salvation comes by grace. That is not something that we do to earn. Salvation comes through faith. That is, salvation is granted to those who have faith in the unseen things of God, culminating in the person of Jesus Christ. And notice no other criteria here in Ephesians 2 verse 8. We'll talk more about this when we do the follow-up video about works, but it's quite a common view for people to add to this basis of salvation and to say things like, well, you have to have faith, but you also have to be baptized, or you have to have faith and you have to do good works. You have to have faith and you have to follow the Old Testament law. You have to maintain your faith. You have to keep your testimony of Jesus Christ. You have to not walk away from your faith. And just keep in mind, this passage and many passages like it are talking specifically about the nature of salvation, and one single criteria is listed here: faith, not faith in addition to a bunch of other things. Faith, only faith. And if it wasn't made abundantly clear here, in the next few words, Paul kind of repeats his point. He says, and this is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. Back to the firefighter analogy again, right? If we think we in any way bring salvation to ourselves, then we're wrong. We've misunderstood. It's a gift of God here. It's extended to those who have faith, but it is a gift of God, not something that you earn, not something that you work for, not something that you deserve. So we've talked in this video, we've talked about faith from the perspective of a definition, the definitions of the terminology. We've talked about how faith is described through the Bible. We've talked about how people were saved through history by their faith. And we've talked about how grace and faith work together within God's economy to bring salvation to those who believe. So that is the video for today, all about faith. Hopefully that has been helpful to you, perhaps bringing more understanding. I certainly hope so. As usual, if you have questions, if you have comments, feel free by all means to like this video, to leave a comment on the video. If you want to contact me outside of YouTube, you could email at thegospelofjohn@gmail.com discussing this video, suggestions or questions for future videos, or anything you like from a theological point of view. That's it for today. Thank you again for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. God bless.